excited to introduce Senator Gary Daines, Representative Chris Kuczynski, who just went through quite a session. So from a business standpoint, it wasn't, we kept an eye on a lot of things from a business perspective that didn't actually work our way very well. But from Marshall, there's a couple things that worked out well for a few things with Marshall. There's a few things, the jobs bill that we wish that we could have seen passed that didn't get to go through either. So you guys had your work cut out for you, that's for sure. So we should appreciate you being here. And again, thanks for Alex for being here to take this. And I'll turn it over to Senator Daines and Representative Kuczynski.
Well, thank you everyone for coming today. Appreciate you taking some time out of your day. A good crowd this morning. I think the free coffee outside might have helped, but no, we appreciate the opportunity to represent you in St. Paul, Gary and I, and just want to, we're kind of on the beginning side. We hit Tracy up this morning, and we'll be here next, and then we're off to Canby, Dawson, and Madison, and then also back to Granite tonight. So, the session was an interesting one. Obviously, having a total DFL control really kind of hampered the effects to limit the size of government and amount of spending in the state of Minnesota. We did have a few opportunities to do a couple of positive things. We were able to secure the funding within the bonding bill for the Merit Center. That was been a long-term goal for us. We did some other water projects across the state, some HEAPR, some of that from a bonding perspective. One of the areas that we did fall short pretty reasonably was the complete elimination of Social Security tax. We were able to increase the amount of folks that were not liable for state taxes, but still left over 351,000 people that currently receive Social Security benefits. And they'll continue to be taxed on those benefits within the state of Minnesota. And the unfortunate part of that is really one of the foundation issues is who's going to spend that money better. Is it a grandparent spending money on their grandchildren, or investing in a business locally, or buying their groceries locally, or is it 201 legislators? And so while we were able to get an increase in the amount of folks that don't have to pay that tax, I think one of the foundation issues is that do we trust people or do we trust legislators more? And time and time again, we fell on the side of let's trust bureaucrats, let's trust folks that represent you in St. Paul, and rather than the people that actually earned it and deserve it. And so, the big issues there, we were able to, in the tax bill, the inclusion of the provision for the vote on the pool here in the city of Marshall. One of the challenges I would have for the city is to look at foundationally is how it's sold, not just on the upfront cost, but what will be the total cost of the project by the time it's paid for, as you're having those conversations with the voting public. I think that's an important difference to have, as that potentially moves forward. Those are some positive things. Some of the other issues that we did fall short on was we had a unique perspective of how do we train young people when it comes to our ability to combine business and government together. We had a small provision of $750,000 that ran into some bumps moving forward to kind of mimic what's going on in South Dakota. South Dakota's got over $70 million of private and public money that's going in to help lessen the cost of education when it comes to some of the trades and the rest, and really that ability to retain and get young people involved in unique life work. And so some of those things we'll be continuing to work on. From a tax bill, from an energy bill, we will all be paying more. The tax bill, whether it be increase in gas tax, whether it be the increase in tab fees, we were able to stop some of the increases within the DNR when it comes to the increased cost of hunting and fishing. But the march was on when it came to growing government. And we definitely saw that. We saw taxes raise across the board. And while folks will say that businesses will pay more in this tax bill, ultimately those businesses pass those costs on to the consumer. And so that's you and me. And so whether it's an energy bill, we had an opportunity to actually decrease the cost of energy in the state of Minnesota by multiples of billions of dollars. Those costs will not go down, they will go up through mandates, and also just the tax on energy throughout the state, with the cash storage fees that are levied on in Monticello and the Prairie Island. That's multiple billions of dollars over many years, and we had an opportunity through amendments to get rid of those taxes that all get passed on to consumers and businesses that make us less competitive, to paid family leave as well. Those are all going to cause major issues for businesses, for cities, for counties, and other governments. And those are not, a business mind first, but from a government standpoint down. That's going to cost our businesses in competition, but also access to human capital as well. Those are some of just the lowlights of the session and some of the highlights. And I just appreciate you guys' willingness to come, and we'll have some great opportunities for some questions as we move forward. Gary, you want to say a few words?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the Marshall Area Chamber of Commerce for hosting this, and also YMCA for furnishing this room that we could use to hold this. So we really do appreciate that, and appreciate you folks doing that. This has been a very interesting session, to say the least. If you were listening once in a while to what was going on, I'm sure that you would see some of the things, or hear some of the things they were talking about, and wonder, where did that come from? But I can tell you, this is one of the sessions to where some of the things that happened, if you tell people, they kind of look at you strangely, but at least you know that those things can't be made up. They just, you can't make some of that stuff up. But to give you a little idea what happened this year is we had a $19 billion surplus, and that was, once they took the inflation, applied that to it, a $17.5 billion surplus. So I guess when I went in, I kind of figured, well, we're going to obviously have some new spending, which we expected. But I also thought we'd have a pretty good strong amount of tax relief too. Well, what ended up happening is it wasn't too deep into the session and the $17.5 billion was spent. It was gone. In fact, I serve on the Finance Committee. It's kind of interesting. They brought a couple of bills back and asked to reduce the amount on them because they were looking for money to try to do some more things. But so not only did they spend the $17.5 billion, if you take a look at all the different bills and take a look at all the new fees or increased fees, the new taxes or increased taxes, it's just a little under $11 billion. So we're taking a look at spending close to $30 billion. In fact, it's a little over that. It's near $31 billion when you put it all together. When I came in 2011, the budget bill we put together for the next biennium was $34.5 billion. The session that we're going to end, the biennium we're going to end this coming June 30th, that budget bill was $52 billion. So that's about an $18.5 billion growth in 12 years. This year, if you take out the one-time spending and just apply the reoccurring spending with tails, we have spent about $21 billion just in one biennium. That's over a 40% increase. The problem we're going to have is when we looked at the February forecast projected we would have a very small surplus in the end of this next biennium, and then we would be probably into a little deeper deficit come the biennium after that, depending on what happened with recession. Now, what they're saying is we very likely will have that deficit in 2 years from now. So what's unfortunate is we're going to come back in 2 years and we're going to have to clean this mess up. And so there's going to have to be some cuts made. And so then it's going to be back to where it was when we took over back in 2011. We had a $6 billion deficit. Well, I don't think we'll see that kind of a deficit, but I do think we're going to see a deficit, and I think that's we're going to have to come back and kind of revisit a lot of this spending that was done this year. So it's been a very interesting time. Some of the things, there was a lot of money spent, a lot of things got done. Some of the stuff certainly not to our liking, but others certainly was certainly some good spending. One of the bills that I know that got passed bipartisanly on both sides of the aisle, in both House and Senate, was the Veterans Bill. We actually had a very good Veterans Bill put together this year. There was additional money for different programs with the veterans, but there also was additional money put into that bill in order to finish the 3 veterans homes that are being built now, one in Montevideo, one down in southeast, and then one in northeast. And so they've already started construction. A lot of them are pretty close to being finished, but they put in the dollars to make sure that they get done the way they should be done. So that was good to see that. They also, the Veterans Cemetery over in Redwood, they put money in to make sure that that gets done. And then also, they put we put $4.6 million into that. And what is not used to complete the construction of the cemetery will be put in a fund for future maintenance and things like that. So that is going to be on good, solid footing. So all in all, we did have a very strong veterans bill. Another bill that we had quite a strong support for in the Minnesota Senate was the Human Services Bill, the Health and Human Services Bill. And the reason we put a lot of support behind that is we all probably are aware of what our situation says with nursing homes. We have some severe issues with our nursing homes. And so we had been negotiating all session trying to get more funds for nursing homes. When the bill came to the floor, they had $100 million in the bill for nursing homes, and they did an amendment and added another $87 million. So there's $187 million were in the Health and Human Services bill for nursing homes. And when it got into conference committee, that got stripped out. They took the $187 million out and put $100 million back in, but that $100 million it had to be borrowed out. So if you were in a nursing home and you needed some money, you could borrow some out of that $100 million. You could borrow money. We had to have it paid back in 18 months, and it was interest-free. Well, that really wasn't helping the nursing homes because most of them, we've lost different nursing homes, and I'm sure everybody in this room probably is familiar with a nursing home that's closed in the last 3-4 years. And there's a couple more on the verge now. And so that wasn't going to solve the problem. So we had the bonding bill left, and that's the only thing that we had any leverage with because they needed 7 of our votes. So late on Friday, the last Friday in session, we were able to negotiate that we ended up getting $300 million for nursing homes. And that $300 million would not be a loan. It would be money that would be paid out. And that money is, the first payment is made to the nursing homes in August of 2023, the second payment in August of 2024, and that $3 million would be dispersed so that these nursing homes can kind of get some solid footing until we can get some other issues with the Medicaid payments and the time period they're paid in. So that was one of the things that we were able to accomplish, but basically because we had the ability to have some control of the bonding bill. There's a lot of other things that went on, but I think at this time, rather than us sitting up here and talking, we'll open it up for questions, and if we can answer them, we'll sure try to, or any comments or concerns. So with that said, who would like to go first?
Yeah, so
Brad.
Some of the bills, they don't go into law until like 2026. I think King County Medical specifically. And there's actually some more that will in place in 2024. Do you see any potential of, once they find out how much some of these programs cost, there's any chance that some of them can be repealed next year?
I don't think we'll see them repealed. On the family paid medical leave, I'm already hearing rumblings that may be coming back next session to get some clarity to it and to clean some things up. One of the areas would be the definition of family. That still is a struggle, and it opens it up too wide. The other thing is that we really don't have a correct fiscal note on that bill. The fiscal note was issued on the bill prior to several amendments being made. Those amendments that were made increased the cost, but they never had a follow-up fiscal note. So the cost is going to be, if you take a look at the 8 states that have something similar to this, their costs went up considerably more than what was originally projected. And so what Minnesota did is we took those 8 bills and picked out the best of each. Well, the amendments didn't show a lot of that. So I think it'll come back next year with some revisions. I mean, we're hoping so. That's what we're asking for, is for this bill to come back so we can make some revisions on it. It's not going to go away, but at least make some revisions on it. We had tried to, I don't think there's any legislature that don't think we need some paid family leave. That's not the issue. The issue is how do we get it? And in Minnesota, it's illegal for insurance companies to sell a paid family leave program. So we tried to get that changed a couple of years ago, but we couldn't get the governor to go along and sign that. But there are some things out there that we could also do that could make this much cheaper. We could keep the same platform, the same program, but hire an outside organization to manage it. And some of the 8 that have it now do that similar to this. They actually do that. They have an outside organization that manages it, and it brings that cost down considerably. This will probably require 300 to 400 new employees. So I think there'll be some things looked at there. Marijuana, that's out there for a ways. There's some things start sooner. I mean, there's some things start August 1st, but then some of the other things don't start out there for a couple of years. I do think that we're going to see that bill coming back and getting cleaned up. There's just a lot of loopholes in the bill. There's a lot of things that are, in a sense, left open. It was kind of, we're going to pass the bill and then we'll figure out how to implement it. So hopefully that piece is implemented with figuring it out the next session. Chris?
Yeah, I think that's, some of the, with the paid family leave specifically, it was, a lot of the conversation was about caps. Like, if you're saying, if you got one sick grandparent, how many people can take off the 12 weeks? Can 12 people take off the 12 weeks? I mean, we don't know how that's going to, if your grandma's from Germany and she's sick, will 12 people be able to travel back for 12 weeks and spend those weeks? I mean, I think their estimates of usage they're trying to normally keep those exceptionally low so that they can try to keep, even in those estimates, the cost is going to be multiples. So the Senate was actually able to put a cap on how much that tax rate can possibly be. And I forget, I think it's like 1.2%, but other states that have less generous programs, they're multiple times that even. So, that up to 5 to 6% potentially. So you're looking at real deal cost. So you're going to have less employees, more cost to do business. And I think that's one of the biggest issues is that when the private sector has an ability to offer something, they did, right? You have a lot of businesses that have some sort of a program internally that have it, and you have a lot of small businesses that it just doesn't, if you want, we should at least allow that product to be sold in the state of Minnesota and not have a top-down. If you estimate that it's going to cost multiple, you look at the program that we wrote for the healthcare, that computer program costs hundreds of millions of dollars to write. That same program is going to be rewritten again in the state of Minnesota and having 300 or 400 employees doing it. There's probably more efficient ways to do it. And, I think that's going to be a big determiner whether or not a business is going to locate in the state of Minnesota. They already estimate that Minnesota is in the top 10% of out-migration. And the out-migration is not lower incomes, the out-migration is on the top side. So we had a testifier in tax committee testify that 85% of the taxes in Minnesota are paid by the top 30%. So if you have one of those people leave, whether it's to Florida for 6 months and buy a lake place or whatever that might be, that has a dramatic effect. And I think that's one of the things that we'll see if we do see a downturn, which depending on which economist you're looking at, we're potentially heading into some sort of recession or depression or whatever that might be in the next few years, that as those, if you're reliant more and more and more on fewer and fewer people, if those fewer and fewer people have a bad year, it extrapolates the issues that your state government's going to have, because you're so much more reliant on those top 30% of taxpayers to pay a vast majority of your bills. We're going to have to see some dramatic changes in the trajectory of government size. You had your hand up. Go ahead.
Well, regarding this, so if someone from our office takes unemployment after they've worked for us, our experience rate goes up to pay back into the fund. Is paid family leave going to be similar to that?
I don't believe so.
No, paid family leave, the experience will not be charged against you. Everybody will pay the same rate. The only thing is after a certain amount of increase in the rate structure, then it starts to weigh heavier onto the employer versus the employee. So if it goes up like some of these other states has, it's not going to be a 50-50 sharing program. It's going to be more on the employer than it is on the employee. So that's, that's an issue. Another issue with this that just wanted to bring up is there are corporations that have programs that exceed this program. If you have one that equals or exceeds, you can get exempted from the program. The only problem is you got to pay an annual exemption fee. Now, I find that interesting that you've got to pay an annual exemption fee if you have a program. If you're already doing the things that this program has encouraged you to do, you're doing those and you're meeting or exceeding, great. But by the way, you have to pay so much a year to be able to do that. I think that's very unfortunate. But other questions?
I have nothing.
Oh, we got another hand in the back here. We'll catch the first.
The Green New Deal, they're forcing all the, get rid of the gas cars, get rid of everything, put charging stations. Trying to shove it down our throat, aren't they?
Well, I think, so the Green New Deal, which is the 100% by 2035 mandate that's going to be coming down, that's going to be, regardless of what folks say, it's going to be exceptionally more expensive. They estimate that if we get rid of your furnaces in your home, within just some, like parts of our state, it's going to have to increase the amount of electricity generated by about 21 gigawatts. So that's essentially saying we're going to get rid of your propane tank, we're going to get rid of your natural gas pipeline that comes to your home, and you're going to heat your home with electricity that comes through your wire. We're going to have to increase the amount of generation that we have by about 21 gigawatts to replace the gas part of our fuel system. And so not every single home is actually wired to do that. So let's say you turn off your furnace for the wintertime and just plug in space heaters in each one of your outlets in your home to heat the house. Your home is not rated to kind of have that general draw within the system, and that backs up. So if you start the problem in the home, so that has to get rewired. You have to. They have like $10 million for folks to rewire their houses in the energy bill, so that these are poor folks that can't afford to rewire their home. They're going to have $10 million to rewire the home so that they can charge their electric vehicle in. And then it backs up from there. So if the house can't handle it, then the infrastructure can't handle it. So from the transformer to the house, then the transformer to the substation, then the substation to the generation spot. And so, that is causing the problem generally throughout it. And then from a transportation standpoint, we're looking at, how does that particularly work to get rid of vehicles and gas and delivery systems with semis and the rest. And, the REC system is going to be alive and well, which is essentially you still may get your electricity from coal or natural gas, but you'll have to pay a fee. So just as Gary said, that even if you're doing the right thing, with your paid family leave, you're still going to have to pay a fee on top of it. You're going to still have to go out and buy RECs to actually generate foundational energy through gas or coal or biomass, which is essentially burning garbage. And then you'll have to pay a REC to go out and buy solar someplace else in the world or wind. And those things are generally okay when it comes to from an investment standpoint, but very heavily, like you look at the solar rewards program or the solar garden program that's in the Excel territory. That's a program that is probably the most expensive solar in the country. It's mandated. You don't have to go through the same regulations, and that's going to get expanded into different areas. So part of that is if you're in Excel energy area, if you have to do a 40-40-20, so two businesses can buy 40% of that solar garden. It's right now capped at 7 acres. They're going to move that to about 35 acres. And then the last little bit needs to potentially be from lower income folks to buy into it or whatever that might be. But that is 4 or 5 times more expensive than industrial solar. So it's a state mandated price that Warren Buffett's bought about 85% of the projects in the state. So, you look at from an increased cost perspective, from a fuel surcharge, if you look at Excel's energy rates, what that's going to cause is these solar gardens, because it's such a high cost, it only creates about 1 to 2% of the energy generation, but at current rates, it's about 17% of the fuel cost. It's soon going to double or triple, which is going to almost exceed the other costs of other fuels, which include, but only produce a small minority of the energy produced. And obviously it's not base load. So when the wind doesn't shine or when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, it doesn't work. And so, what the way the MISO grid works and the other grid systems work is, the Southwest America, so like Arizona and Nevada and some of those spaces are generally seen as kind of the hot spot when it comes to solar generation. The Midwest is actually probably the best spot for when it comes to wind generation. But the problem is we're forcing through policy to jam it here in the Midwest. If you look at the Californians and the Arizonians and the Nevadians, right now they are fighting to preserve pristine desert from solar development. So they are pushing things into law to protect pristine desert. And we've tried to let's preserve pristine farmland. And I would ask you, an acre of solar on desert or an acre on a solar on 5-foot black dirt, what makes the most sense? It's obviously not the black dirt, right? You can't grow corn, you can't grow beans, you can't grow food. That's some of the big issues that we have, is that we're taking something that maybe isn't the most efficient here and putting it in Minnesota, and they're fighting to keep it from happening in Arizona, where, all you do is give a tortoise some shade in Arizona, so.
It was interesting, yesterday, Paul and I were doing the town hall meetings on the other side, and the same question come up, we got talking about that, and Paul looked on the MISO chart, and yesterday, only 3% of the energy being used was being produced by green energy. 97% was still fossil fuel energy. And we're, 12 years away from having the 2035 mandate in place. Another problem is that we kind of dubbed the name of that energy bill the blackout bill, and people kind of thought, what's that all about? But some of you are probably aware, but back in August, we had a couple of days to where the grid in Minnesota was about to go down, the electrical grid was about to go down because the usage was so much higher than what they could provide. And then that happened again between Christmas and New Year's, where there was a couple of days that really got cold and the usage was so high. So what they did, this organization, and I can't think of the name of it, it's a state organization, not organization, but it's a state division of the state. And they called around and had these communities that have the diesel generators, ask them to use those. Now, when you use a diesel generator, the PCA has a surcharge if you use that because it's not clean energy. So a lot of different communities use those generators to supply energy, to generate energy for their community, so that their community wouldn't be taking it off the grid. And actually, within a couple hours, we would have been blacked out in Minnesota. But due to that, the fact we had these diesel generators sitting around, we got past that, and we didn't have a blackout. But what was interesting is when the state calls and asks the people to run those generators, PCA has they have a fee that they charge when you do that because it's not clean energy, and then the PCA turned around and sent out the request for the fee to be paid. The governor did get involved in that and said, no, back that off, we're not going to require that fee. But it goes to show just how fragile this whole system is getting as we take more and more fossil fuel out and we're not getting it replaced with good, solid, backup green energy. So it is an issue. Yep. Other questions?
So
Yes.
overall, does the Minnesota legislation back the green energy thing, or are they kind of like, nah, that's too quick, it's too much control when everything's run by electricity? Let's just face it.
It's pretty much party split. The DFL pretty much support green energy. They pretty much 100%. The Republicans, we understand the need for some green energy, but we certainly don't support the extent that it is that they're requesting it to go to as quickly as they're requesting that. There's just a lot of downfalls that have not been answered. There's a lot of cost issues that have not been answered, but also there's a lot of production issues that have not been answered. On the federal level, we've reduced fossil fuel energy at about 3 times of the rate we're bringing in green energy. And so that's why we're starting to see grid problems throughout the nation, is because of the fact that we've got over aggressive on reducing fossil energy, and the aggressiveness, there's not enough green energy because of the instability of it to make up that difference. Chris?
You know, I think just from a market perspective, I think, you know, I think a conservative position when it comes to energy is just an all-above position. If it makes economic sense to do it, we should do it, right? And so if it's an environmental question, whether or not we should have coal or solar, then you need to look from a global perspective what's going on. So what we're going to look at, okay, look at how great the United States is. We've gotten rid of all of our coal plants, okay? All right, so then what happened globally? Do we I mean, would everyone agree that we have a global climate, right? So what is China doing? China is adding this year more coal than we have in the United States. So they're building brand new coal plants. So whether or not you take the North Dakota coal that's being burnt, I forget, it starts with a B, whatever town it is, Beulah or whatever it is in North Dakota, whether that coal is burnt in North Dakota and used locally, or it's put on a train and shipped across the ocean and burnt in China, do you think it's going to help the environment? Right? I mean, that's essentially what we're doing, right? You know, so, I mean, the idea that whether or not you, regardless of what you think of unions, do you believe that we should have, those are union jobs that work in those plants. In Sherco, the Sherco plant that's going to get closed down, those are all union jobs, good paying jobs. We've tried to put amendments into the bill to say that, fine, you can have your Green New Deal, but don't source the base materials from slaves. And what we were told in committee essentially was, well, you know, the problem of environmental justice is bigger than that here in the U.S. We just need to move forward. And we're not going to move those amendments forward to say, you know what, hey, we don't, if you're a slave labor in Congo mining cobalt, you can't do it anymore. Or this or that down the list. Because, you know, if you believe that, you know, there's some folks in this room that believe we should have reparations for something that happened 150 years ago. Yet we have folks that are unwilling to stop slavery in other parts of the world just so that we can drive a Green New Deal car. And I think that's a real shame, right? Like, we want to have our eggs and, you know, eat them too. And, you know, the future is what it is. But I think from a market-based solution, you know, if, you know, wind makes a lot more sense economically than solar, just because of when the actual energy needs to be used. You know, in the evenings when people are home from work, that's when you normally see your peak times for energy use, you know, throughout the day for AC use. It has a place, but why is the state getting involved in something when globally it's not really going to make a difference? And drive the cost up. I mean, just the tax on cask storage. So we had amendments that would have dropped the amount of cost to ratepayers. Right now at Monticello, they spend $350,000 per year to store the nuclear waste casks at that site. In Prairie Island, it's $500,000 per year per cask, which there's probably about 50 of them there. On average, that's $37 million a year. That's going to get increased to about $50 million a year. And that's not money that XL pays, that's money that ratepayers, those are all costs that get passed on to the consumer. And one of the things that we said, there's a lot of, out in Idaho and out west, there's a lot of development happening with micronuclear, where they're taking like salt base and different types of nuclear plant production, which is more like on a semi-level. It's the same type of a nuclear plant that would be like in an aircraft carrier or something like that, and moving those into, from a regional standpoint, rather than having these large centralized plants, but have more of a distributed system. You know, how does that place? Let's just have an amendment so that we could at least look into that technology. Not approve the program, not approve the project, but say, let's just look at the technology to say, how would that fit and how could that integrate into the Midwest, into Minnesota when it comes to energy production? And all those things are just getting, you know, slammed away with a thumb on behalf of that. And why is that? Well, I mean, you can raise a lot of money from, you know, minting new millionaires by mandating profit. So, next question. Go ahead, ma'am.
In southwestern Minnesota here, we've seen that wind does work. So, and with mandate coming up, is there anything in the legislature to decrease the permitting burden to get that moving faster?
Well, there is some stuff like that. I don't believe it should. I mean, I think in certain areas, you know, community protection is got to be one of our key pieces for it. It's one thing to support wind when you're profiting it from it, but it's another thing if you're a rural resident that has to look at it and live by it. I think, whether it be from a lighting standpoint, one of the issues that I've heard a lot from a lot of people, if you especially live in the southern part of Lyon County, is looking at your sunsets used to be pristine, and now you got flashing red lights the whole night. And so, those are big issues. They estimate that there's 4,000 wind turbines right now in the state of Minnesota. They estimate if that's to move forward, the 2035, it's going to have to move up to about 40,000. And so I don't believe that we should be making it easier for those to be built, because I think we need to protect not only, they're not building up in the metro, I can tell you that. They're not putting them in Minneapolis and St. Paul, they're putting them out in our neighborhoods. And so I think protecting those from, where they're being put, how does it affect, these transmission lines, depending on who you visit with, there's a lot of concern. I've just noticed with new transmission lines that we can't get radio stations in from Sioux Falls that we normally would get. And these are brand new lines that just went up. And so because of the interference and whatnot. So I think, there needs to be protections, but I don't think greasing the skids too much is what we need. We need to have some robust discussions about permitting, where those things are at, who actually wants them, beyond just the people that are profiting from it.
As Chris alluded to, there's some talk about some of the permitting stuff. I would agree with Chris. I think we have to be cautious. But yes, we have certainly some wind being generated here, but if you start looking at the cost efficiency of it, it works, but it's not cost efficient at this point. And so if you can increase to get enough of them on the transmission lines, this is one of the problems with the cost, is when you have wind and solar, it's about a 40% of the time it's actually accomplishing what we want it to accomplish. So when you start putting these transmission lines in and you build these expensive lines, they're only being used about 40% of the time. And so there's going to have to be a way of getting those junctured in so that we can use them a lot more in order to make it more efficiency, to make green energy more competitive. Next question? Yes, sir.
Gun legislation.
Yep.
It's pretty scary, this red flag law. Can you explain a little bit exactly what the bill says?
Well, the red flag portion, there was a lot of different bills dropped. Red flag, and then I forget the other one that was passed. But red flag primarily is, if you're deemed through a court, by court order, to be either dangerous to yourself, potentially, or to someone else, if you've made a threat or whatever, that you potentially have your Second Amendment rights taken away. The biggest danger that I see with that is just the fundamental, it is a constitutional right to bear arms. While we don't want guns in dangerous people's hands, but we also believe that you should have the ability to defend yourself in a court of law. And I think that's one of the biggest concerns that we do have with moving forward of any of those particular piece of legislation, is that, one, you don't have the ability to, you may get slapped with an injunction without even knowing that there's been a complaint about something about you. Whether it's an ex-wife that doesn't like you, doesn't want you, knows that you love to hunt and fish, and decides that, you're a danger to society and I'm going to move something forward, and you wake up on a Saturday morning of deer hunting and there's a police officer at your door confiscating your guns. I think that's a big problem, and I think the courts will potentially iron some of that out. The other part is universal background checks. That is, I think, fundamental. If something's a fundamental right, you don't have to ask permission for it. The idea that you have to keep paperwork for 10 years for a gun that you may transfer to someone, even for a week, and you need to keep it in case a crime was committed during that week of time that you borrowed a gun. So this is not just selling, this is just lending. So let's say you got a buddy that's going out west and that's going to go elk hunting and doesn't own a big caliber rifle. You have to you give that gun to that friend, you have to keep paperwork on that friend for 10 years in case he killed some guy while he was out in Montana. Well, the problem is no one knows what you have, right? So, the idea of universal background checks is really, the idea is a universal registration system. So how does the state even know what you have? It's none of the state's business to understand. Government's job is not to know what you have when it comes to your Second Amendment rights. The reason why Lexington and Concord happened was because the colonists stored their ammunition in central depots, and the British came in and they were going to blow up those depots so that they had no access to protect themselves. I mean, we are in different times, right? And people say, well, that's 100, 200 years ago. That's not the job of government to understand what people have, and they shouldn't. The federal government's prohibited from keeping a list of guns. Just read a history book and understand why that's a bad idea. And I think this is a keystone. The argument that this will make a difference is really, I think, the idea. Like, this won't solve gun crime, because it won't. Most of the guns that are used in a crime are stolen. And so one of the biggest issues we do have is within the public safety bill is that over and over again we see gun crimes getting pleaded down to a lesser charge. And so we have people that are going out and stealing a gun, shooting up a neighborhood, killing a small family. And rather than blame the gang or the individual that actually did the shooting, we blame a gun, right? That doesn't solve problems. That causes division. You need to hold individuals accountable, not an innate object. And, I think the idea that those will cause crime to go down, most of the time, the statistics are pretty clear. Like when it comes to, if someone has said, hey, you know what, I'm going to kill myself and commit suicide, those are the cases that maybe you see where a gun's taken out of the home, where the gun's then not used in a suicide. But then, the suicide probably happens from a different, whether it's a rope or driving into a tree or whatnot. And so, the difference is that, if you look at statistics, the suicide attempts among women are much higher than it is for men, but men are more successful because they do happen to use guns more often. And so that's not necessarily a reason to stomp out a constitutional right, but it is a reason to at least look at the issue, and I think in certain cases, there could be some value to it, but I think we also need to understand that you need to be able to protect yourself in a court of law and have those rights.
It's interesting, but in the judiciary bill that passed, and it actually went through conference committee and passed, the Democrats passed that bill forward. So when Chris was talking about people not being penalized to the extent of what they could be being penalized, they passed a bill this year that if you've committed a major crime, now the law says that you're not eligible for parole unless you've served 2/3 of the time in jail. They changed that to 50% of the time. So now, if you've committed a violent crime and served 50% of the time, now you're eligible for parole. And that's going to affect thousands of prisoners that could be on early release that have committed some serious crimes. Straying off of the gun thing, but catalytic converters. We heard so much about catalytic converters. So for 6 years when I chaired the Commerce Department, I tried to get a converter bill put together to where the criminal would be the one that would be penalized, not the recycling place that was recycling them. And we could not get that done. They actually passed a bill and it reduced the penalty for people stealing them, but increased the penalty for people receiving them. And they think that that's going to solve the problem. This session has been amazing how many opportunities they've had and how many bills they've passed to reduce the sentences to people committing the crimes, but figuring out a different way to get penalties on people that receive the goods or get caught in it some way or another, like I'm talking about recyclers and stuff. And they're just really switching where the penalty should be placed and who should be responsible. They're just really switching that around, and it's really unfortunate to see how much that's happening. Next question. Yes, sir.
It seems the teachers union was behind a lot of the education policy. For example, teachers are now able to negotiate in their contract class sizes. If in 24 the legislature switches, is that able to get repealed, or is that in there?
That is going to take, in order to get that repealed, you'd have to have the trifecta on the Republican side for that to happen.
Or a moderate VFL.
that very likely will not happen. That was taken out of the bill, and it was removed from the bill, and then in conference committee, it got put back in.
It takes away all of the management ability of the board and the administration.
Exactly. There's several things happened in education this year that really took a lot of the ability for the school district and the administrators and the teachers to manage their schools. It made a world of difference. And unfortunately, it seems that the state, we have the idea that we know more about education than anybody that's in education. And as legislatures, we absolutely do not. But we see that we've seen this trend coming for the last 4 or 5 years to where there's more push to come to the legislative body and get us to make decisions to help them. That way they don't have to negotiate them in a contract. The other thing we've done is we've taken away some of the authority that the school boards and the administrators have. And when you start doing that, you're starting to break the system down. We put $2.5 billion new dollars into E12 education this year. Probably about 800 of that went that's going to be assisting the students. And so that's really unfortunate. We've kind of lost focus of what education's about at the E12 level. Locally, people haven't, but at the state, we've kind of lost our way as far as what we expect from education and what we think we have to do in order to get the achievement gap closed. And it's just amazing some of the stuff that come up in the bills that, fortunately, a lot of it didn't get through the day, but still it is quite concerning. Yep.
I think we saw that time and time again when the DFL majority have an opportunity to either empower locally elected officials or empower state government or bureaucrats. Every single time they chose, let's empower unelected bureaucrats in the state of Minnesota. So whether that be with marijuana, we had amendments to say, hey, if you don't want to have a marijuana shop in your town, the city should be able to decide. If you're a county that doesn't want it in your county, let the county decide. Nope, the state knows best. We're going to force these in, and we're going to force who actually owns the business. If you're someone that's in jail currently on a drug charge, and you're released from jail, you get to be the first one to actually buy one of these permits and put one of these businesses in your town. You know, we're told over and over the reason why legalized marijuana in California fails is because cities have the ability to not have them, that don't want them. And I would argue, is there a marijuana issue on the black market in Los Angeles? Because there's a marijuana shop everywhere in Los Angeles. And guess what? There still is, right? So that's not going to solve the issue. What it's going to do is create, a top-down St. Paul knows best. And same with the school boards. Over and over and over, whether it's even dealing with a troubled child in the classroom. Is the teacher understand that classroom better on, what would potentially work as to get this kid reined in from just being out of control and disrupting all the kids that are trying to pay attention? Nope, St. Paul knows best. We're going to teach you we're going to tell you how to conduct that. Is it holding the kid out of, keep them in class rather than send them out for recess or whatever? I mean, that's the kind of prescriptive stuff. So the idea that you're going to run for locally elected office, hear all the complaints as a school board member or city council or county commissioner, but then be able to do jack squat about it because the legislature told you how to do your job. We're trying to get people to actually run for local elected offices and get involved locally so they can make a difference. You know what the state government's doing? Is saying, nah, we don't give a rip what you think, we know best. Over and over and over and over again. It's sad. I mean, if you think about the idea of some things work and some things different. Do we learn from the school districts where it's working? No. We're going to just decide whatever it is, and we're going to do a state policy across the board. Go ahead, ma'am.
So working with the city and being an administrator, my biggest question with all of the lunch and learns that I've been going through right now, especially with like Minnesota cities, when it comes to the marijuana bill, it's not the retail that I'm worried about. especially since I grew up in Oklahoma and I kind of know what's going on down there. It's the grows that I have all the questions about. Are we as cities going to be able, you know, if you go back to legislation, to regulate the grows coming into our communities, where they can set the grows up, how we can regulate those?
At this point, the bill, they did do an amendment on the bill, and at first there was no control by the city whatsoever. Now the control that you have is you do not have any control on the fact that a license can be in your community or this or that or the next thing. What you can control is the location. If it's too close to a school or too close to a church, you have some control there. That's the end of the control. Anything past that is controlled by the state. If you put in an ordinance, the state's authority will override that. So it's very, very limited. And there are 14 different types of licenses. A person can only have one license, and that involves growing, it involves distributing, it involves manufacturing. And this is designed, these growing operations are designed to be very small. They don't want the larger folks coming in and, you know, the acre type thing, they don't want that size. They want the real small stuff, you know, the smaller greenhouse type. That's what they're looking for. So when you look at the license, there's 14 different licenses. The first people that have the first priority, as Chris alluded to, are the people who have been released from jail for a marijuana charge. So let's say that you had a major drug violation, but it was negotiated down to a marijuana charge, you will be released. They'll automatically be released. They'll have the first right to get the license. Then the second level tier, the folks that get the second tier that'll have eligibility at the highest level will be the BIPOCs. And then locations. Also the location of these licenses plays into it. The first priority for the location on these licenses will be in the poorer communities. And the relationship, the philosophy that they've explained is this, that marijuana is going to be an economic development tool. And this is how we're going to lift a lot of these people out of poverty, is by having them be part of that situation. I struggle with that because if you take a look at where most of the drug problems are, and that's where we're going to go in, and that's where we're going to grow, distribute, and manufacture. So it is interesting.
Well, what they don't understand is you can fit it in a downtown building. And I mean, that's what we're going to do. So if we can't limit how many, so these small communities that have these downtown buildings that are not being utilized, growers can come in and retrofit them for grows. And is there anything we can do to say no or one?
There is some discussion right now, and I don't think it got in the last bill, but if you're under 12,500, I think that there could be a limit as to how many could be put into your community. And I think that if it isn't in this bill, it will. I think it'll be taken care of before it's actually all implemented, because that's a big concern. Yep. Because you could get a small community, a lot of empty buildings, it'd be the perfect place to do it.
Go ahead.
Yes, David.
Question about higher education. See if it concerns the House, but I appreciate the comments from both of you. Chris, back in April, when the House was voting on the higher education bill, it considered an amendment from a Metro representative to establish a commission to, quote, realign many state campuses and facilities. And it didn't specify Greater Minnesota, but by numbers, that was obviously the intent. It got 59 votes. There was a time, maybe 20 years ago, another Metro member offered a similar bill repeatedly and got 20 to 25 votes. So there's a good deal more interest in this idea now. My question is, what lesson do we need to draw from that? What are the broader implications for delivering higher ed in Greater Minnesota?
Sure. Well, I think that was an amendment. I think it was Representative Robbins that presented that. And that was kind of a study to look at kind of obviously whether you're Democrat or Republican, you're always concerned with efficiencies, right? So what is the direction that education is taking? Is it taking on a more brick and mortar style approach, or is it moving towards maybe a more of an online position? And you look from an efficiency standpoint that if the future is looking at more of an online presence when it comes to education, then what's the need and what role does a brick and mortar institution play? Obviously, being in Southwest Minnesota, we have some of the smaller campuses, especially SMSU is probably the smallest campus when it comes to the MINSCU system as a 4-year institution. We have, Minnesota West with a couple of 2-year institutions in the district and in Southwest Minnesota. So I voted against that just from a concern that, what it would potentially come up with is saying, well, our smallest institutions are probably the least efficient when it comes to a student ratio, the square foot maintenance versus revenue and all those different keys, which would potentially lead to if budget cuts potentially are coming, that if a study is out there, that we would be potentially first on the list of closure. And so that's I think what that was getting after.
This topic has been coming up quite a bit the last couple of years. The House had a vote on it, the Senate did not, but it is certainly something that's discussed in higher education on a continual basis. And I think, like Chris alluded to, what's happening is we're seeing so much switch to online learning. And we've got some campuses in the state system that are not performing well at all. And the one here in Marshall is certainly not one of those. Marshall, and congratulations to you, Dr. J, and to your entire staff and professors over there, have done a good job of keeping your enrollment up. And 2 years ago, I think you led the growth in enrollment, and you've been holding very stable. If you look, as you well know, if you look at some of your counterparts, that's just not the case. And there is one college that, if you take a look at what's happened the last 4 to 5 years, justification is probably getting harder and harder on an annual basis. And so that's why some of these things keep coming up. I don't know that there's a big move to start closing colleges. I would say that's not the case, but I think there is a move to take a closer look at what can be done with those that are really struggling and what can be done to make something work there, or what the next step should be. So with that said,
I got a question right there. There we go.
Go ahead.
Thank you. You're talking about all the money that the legislature spent, and I noticed that there's $7 million new money for funding Lyon County projects, and specifically for Marshall, $4,732,000 for National Guard Armory, $2,250,000 for the Merit Training Center.
Yep.
My question is, did you two fellows vote for these funding bills? And if not, why not?
Okay, so take the bonding bill that included those pieces. The Readiness Center, that was done through the state organization, and there's several readiness centers that did get money, Marshall being one of them. The Merit Center, like you said, they got $2.2 million, and I voted for the bonding bill. There were several reasons I voted for it. One of the reasons I voted for the bonding bill is that was the last train out of the station that could salvage our nursing homes. And when I take a look at what was happening in the nursing homes, the only way we were going to get any money to speak of for nursing homes and stop this bleeding that's going on was to negotiate a bonding bill that we would get $300 million of money out of the general fund for nursing homes. And I said to them, when we were negotiating this, I said, if you folks will I give them an outline of things they had to do. And if the DFL would agree to do that, I would put up a vote, and I would bring the votes to make sure this bill got passed. And I voted for the bill, and I will defend my vote for it because of all of the other things that went with it. The other thing is that if we take a look at that bill, and look at all the dollars that went out in different places, you will notice that rural Minnesota, we did not get our fair share. And so anytime, if there's a reasonable bonding bill, and I can get an offset for it, I'm probably going to support it if we can get money in rural Minnesota.
I voted no. My big concern was when we've had, as Gary alluded to earlier, just such a giant growth in government. If you look at, an increase in government by 40%, That was a big concern for me. And so the foundation issue of, you know, we worked very hard at getting projects in the bill, but how large it got, the inclusion of over $200 million to nonprofits through the bonding bill was a big concern for me. These are organizations that maybe started 18 months ago, yet they get $1 million through a bonding bill. We don't even know who these people are. You know, with Feeding Our Future, we saw over $250 million in fraud, and no one's gone to jail. There's no investigation because they happen to be probably more politically aligned with the other party. And the idea that we're going to put $200 million in bonding to organizations that we quite frankly have no idea who they are, how the money is going to get spent, and what for. You know, if you believe that we shouldn't raise taxes when you have a $17 billion surplus, which I don't, why on earth would we borrow money too? You know, we have all that, those $17 million, 9 of it being one-time money. That money should not have been for giveaways to whoever it is. It should have been used for just basic projects, build bridges, build the Merit Center, build those. And so my no vote was a firm look as where we should be going when it comes into priorities when it comes to Minnesota. Not increasing the debt. You know, you look at what's going on at the federal level, the federal debt ceiling, all that, right? You don't do the right thing by doing the wrong thing. And was it a tough vote? Yeah. You know, I wanted to support my projects when it came to a yes vote, but we worked hard to get them in. But I felt it was important that we represented common sense when it comes to spending as well, because those are important issues too. Any other questions?
I just have one more thing. You know, when I go to the store and I buy something, you know, it's $10 and I give them a $20 bill, they give me change. When the legislature has this giant bill like this, and we all pay our taxes, and we have too much in, what if all the taxpayers just said, okay, you've got your money, what if we quit paying taxes at that time? You know, they never give it back, the Democrats never give it back, so it's just...
I would recommend doing that.
Yeah, right, I don't think that you would want to. It's time.
Or we next ourselves into South Dakota or something, you know, it's ridiculous what's going on.
Yep. I'm sorry, we're going to have to, we're running past. Yep.
I am totally being honest here. I feel like I've been living in the twilight zone from this point. I can't believe this crap. And I can't believe anybody still votes Democratic. And I'm sorry if you're a Democratic person in here. I'm going to point you out. If we got rid of Biden, Walz, a lot of what's going on would not be going on.
So maybe the question is.
Okay, folks, we're already almost 5 minutes past. We got the next one we got to be to, so I apologize. I would like to continue, but we do need to do our closing comments, so otherwise we're going to be late to our next meeting. And so thank you folks very much for coming. We really, truly do appreciate it. If you have questions or anything we can assist with, either give my office a call or Chris's office a call. If we can't find answers for you, we'll get you to the people that can get you answers to your questions. And as Chris alluded to earlier, it is certainly a privilege for me to represent you at the Minnesota Senate. I do appreciate the opportunity. And every session is a little bit different, and we understand that, and we work with that as the best we can. Our hands were kind of tied this year, but we're going back next year, and we'll take the fight with us and see what we can get accomplished. So with that said, thank you, and I'll turn it over to Chris.
Again, thank you. Just in general, someone was asked what you can do. Just coming to events like this is important. Just being engaged, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, to be involved and let your voice be heard. We may not always agree, but just be determined and move forward, and our country will be better for it. So, thanks.